Yeah, I'm Andrew from Qubit, here with Synthtopia, NAMM 2019. We have 3 very exciting releases to show you this year. We have our Chord V2, Prism, and the Bloom. So we'll dive right in with our Prism module. The Prism is a multi-dimensional signal processor with stereo inputs and outputs. The best way to think of it is as a prism-shaped audio buffer, where each corner of this prism has a different type of DSP map to it. So depending upon where your signal's panned around inside of this shape, it's going to be processed accordingly. So let's just dive right in here. At its core, we have an audio buffer. Now we can lock this buffer in place with the freeze control. So it's just going to loop whatever's in your buffer and play it back forever. The length of this buffer is set with the time control. So if we bring that up, it's going to be a little bit shorter. And what's really exciting is the time control stays active even after freeze has been turned on. So you can keep mangling your signal even after you've locked that buffer. So on the x-axis of our prism, we have a comb filter. So if we bring this up, you'll hear it start to get some delay effects. On the z-axis is the time control, so it's the delay time of our comb filter. So if I start to bring that up, we'll get into the familiar comb territory. And then on the z-axis, we have the decimate control, which is going to apply sample rate reduction and bit depth reduction. So between these 3 controls alone, you get a lot of unique textures and effects. Along the top, we have a state variable filter. You have low pass, which we've been listening to so far, high pass, and band pass outputs. In addition, you can deactivate the state variable filter altogether and just only mess with the center prism stage. The cutoff control has an associated CV input, and that has a dedicated attenuverter, so we can attenuate and invert the incoming CV. And then on the left, we have the mode button. What this does is it lets us rearrange the signal path so that the state variable is either at the beginning of the prism or the end of the prism. So now it's set to the end. We can actually completely close the filter. We're not going to hear any comb filter effects. Whereas if we bring it back, you're going to hear it ring out if the comb filter's up a little bit. So different textures. So that's the Prism. It's going to be available in March, and the retail price will be $249. It's 12 HP wide. Next, we have our Chord V2. So our original polyphonic oscillator is back. It's half the size, and it has at least twice the functionality that the original had. So if you're not familiar with the Chord, it is a polyphonic oscillator with 4 voices. Each voice has an individual output, and then there's a sum output at the far right, which takes care of all the summing of the signals internally, so you don't need to do that on your own. So, since the V1, we tried to take into account all of the requests users made, features that they wanted to have, things they wanted a little different, and we tried to implement as many of these as we could on the new version. So, right off the bat, we've doubled the coarse frequency range, and we've completely revamped the waveform section. So you still have access to your traditional wave shapes, sine, triangle, sawtooth, and square, and you can morph between them. Bring up the frequency a little bit so you can hear it. In addition, we've added 7 new wavetable banks. So the first bank here is our granular synthesis bank. The next bank is our vowel and FOF synthesis bank. I'll show you with that from the root output. In addition, you can actually load in your own wavetables via a microsd card slot on the back, so you're not restricted to just the wavetables that the unit ships with. At the top we have our mode control. Now what this does is it lets us choose between 3 distinct modes of the chord. The one we've been listening to so far is the chord mode, where all 4 notes are tuned together, giving you right up easy plug and play chords. The first alternate mode is melody mode. Now in this setting, the 7th chord tone becomes decoupled from the rest of the chord, and you can sequence it independently. So you hear the 7th chord tone is moving on its own, but the root triad is never changing. If you wanted to change it, you could, and you could actually sequence it with the volt per octave jack. So you'd send a bass line to your volt per octave and still have your melody in the 7th chord tone. The 3rd mode that we've added is full polyphonic mode. In this setting, each voice runs free, and you can sequence or tune it independently of the rest. So We can choose any tuning we want, or we can just sequence all 4 independently and have full polyphonic textures. And you get right back to your original chord. The quality control sets the chord type that's available. We have just about every diatonic chord ever constructed, or commonly used at least, major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, what have you. In addition, on the new version, you can actually program in custom chords and recall them on the fly. So if you want microtonal tunings, tone clusters, or just anything outside of the Western musical chromatic canon, you can access that. So if we hold down harmonize for 3 seconds, you enter the user bank of chord qualities. You can program in 8 of your own unique qualities and tunings, and then sequence through them and recall them later. Beneath quality, we have the voicing control. What this does is it defines the placement of the notes within the octaves, and it provides access to things like inversion and specific voicings like drop 2 and drop 3. So it doesn't change the tonality of your chord, just the overall sound or texture of it. Last, we have the harmonize function. What this does is it's going to intelligently choose the correct chord quality based on your incoming volt per octave CV. So if we send a sequence to the volt per octave input, we have constant structure movement. It's going to be very dissonant. We're going to have a lot of notes that aren't in the key. As soon as you turn on harmonize, you're going to get the correct chord quality based on that step in the scale. And what's new on the V2 is you can actually choose all the modes. So you can do minor harmonizations, you can do Mixolydian, Lydian, Phrygian, so on and so forth. And that's the V2. So the chord's going to be available in May, and the retail price will be $329. Sorry, $299 for the chord. So the Bloom. So the Bloom is our fractal sequencer. What's really unique about this is that it has ability to create an infinite number of variations of your bass sequence. So you can create things that never repeat the same way twice. So if we plug a sequence into the chord here, let's do our root. There we go. So let's talk about the fractal functionality first. On the right here, we have our branches control. Now what branches controls is the number of variations that are accessible of our bass sequence. So right now you'll hear we have an 8-step repeating sequence, it's never changing. As I turn up branches, it's going to tack on in a variation in addition to your original sequence. So it's going to play through. Once it hits the branch, it's going to turn purple. So you notice it played back differently on the second 8 steps than it did on the first. Now as you move the branches knob to the right, you're going to have more and more variations that are accessible based on your original sequence. Now the path knob sets the direction or the route that the sequence takes as it travels through the variations. So each different setting of path is going to be a new sequence altogether because it's going to rearrange your available branches in relation to the root. And then above that we have the root knob, which is a global transposition. It can be diatonic or not diatonic, so you can get the notes in between if you want. It's really useful for sequencing along with chord progressions or other sequencers. Now at the bottom of our fractal section, we have the mutation control. What this allows you to do is generate random deviation on a per step basis. So if it's all the way down, we have 0% random deviation, our sequence is going to be locked in, it's going to play back the same. As you bring this up, you're going to add the amount of, a percentage of change on a per step basis. So right now it's going to generate new notes 50% of the time. If you pull it all the way to the right, it's going to be new notes 100% of the time. So it's really useful for if you don't want to fine tune all the notes in your sequence, you can just generate new values, or if you want to dial it in a little bit, it'll slowly change over time while still being very familiar and similar to your original sequence. So let's talk about the core sequencer functionality now. There are 2 channels. Each channel has 32 steps. You can tell which channel you're currently editing via the channel button. Blue is channel 1, green is channel 2, and when the LED is white, you're editing both channels simultaneously. Along the left, we have 8 encoders, which correspond to the steps that we're currently editing. And there are 4 pages of steps, so we have 32 steps available per channel. You want to change the note value per step, you just change the encoder. These are detented encoders, so you get a nice tactile feedback whenever you update the pitch value. You know exactly how many steps you've moved. If you want to remove this specific step's gate output from its gate channel, you just click the encoder and it removes it from your programmable gate output. Now to access any of the deeper playback settings like the scale that you have or the length of your sequence, all you need to do is hold down the shift button and then change the length. So now we have a 16-step sequence. If you wanted to adjust the scale that you were on, you just hold shift, change the scale. You could set per step slew, per step ratchets, division or multiplications of the clock, so on and so forth. And one feature that's extremely exciting is you can save 32 patterns per channel. These save between power cycles, really useful for live performance situations, and just for saving your work and organizing it for later. And that's the Bloom. It's going to be available in September, and the retail price will be $329.